The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above classroom 204B when Sarah Martinez first heard the sound that would change everything. It wasn't the sharp crack of a textbook dropping or the screech of chair legs against linoleum. This sound was different, muffled, distant, but unmistakably wrong. Like a firecracker wrapped in cotton, echoing from somewhere deep within Jefferson High School's labyrinthine corridors. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah's hand froze midway through writing Pythagorean theorem on the whiteboard. 28 sophomore faces stared back at her, their afternoon stupor momentarily broken by her sudden stillness. She had been their substitute math teacher for exactly 11 days now, filling in for Mrs. Henderson, who's recovering from hip surgery. 11 days of pretending that solving for X was the most complicated problem she'd ever encountered. "Miss Martinez?" Jenny Kowalski's voice pierced the silence. "You okay?" Sarah's fingers tightened around the red marker, her knuckles showing white against olive skin. In the span of 3 heartbeats, her mind cataloged everything: the classroom's single exit near the front, the reinforced glass in the door, the heavy oak desk that could serve as cover, the supply closet with its flimsy lock. Her body remembered what her civilian facade tried to forget. "Everyone stay seated," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several students sit up straighter. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, the way her shoulders squared, how her feet shifted to a more stable stance, the manner in which her eyes began systematically scanning exits and potential threats. Another sound echoed through the building. This time, there was no mistaking it. Marcus Thompson, a lanky kid who usually spent class time sketching skateboard tricks in his notebook margins, was the first to understand. His face went pale as parchment. Was that lockdown procedures? Now, Sarah's command cut through the air like a blade. She moved to the door with fluid precision, her movements eerily quiet for someone wearing sensible flats on squeaky linoleum. The students had never seen their mild-mannered substitute teacher move like this, like water flowing around obstacles, like someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory. The lock clicked into place with a finality that seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. Sarah pulled down the small window shade, then grabbed the rolling cart of textbooks and positioned it against the door. Her actions were methodical, automatic, performed with the muscle memory of someone who had done this before in places far more dangerous than suburban Ohio. "Everyone to the back corner, away from the windows." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. "Sit on the floor, no talking." Alyssa Chang, honor roll student and perpetual hand raiser, opened her mouth to ask a question, but something in Sarah's eyes stopped her. It was like looking at a completely different person, someone who belonged in fatigues rather than a cardigan from Target. As the students huddled together like frightened rabbits, Sarah's mind was already 3 moves ahead. She inventoried potential. Weapons, the heavy-duty stapler on the desk, scissors in the supply drawer, a fire extinguisher mounted near the door. Her fingers unconsciously traced the scar on her left shoulder, hidden beneath the soft wool of her sweater, a reminder of a roadside bomb outside Kandahar that had claimed 3 of her squad members and earned her a Purple Heart she kept locked. In a safety deposit box, the school's PA system crackled to life, Principal Watson's voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Teachers and students, we are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Lock your doors, turn off lights, and remain silent until further notice." Sarah was already moving, her hand steady as she hit the light switches. The classroom plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the afternoon sun filtering through partially closed blinds. She had memorized the school's layout during her first week, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Old habits from places where knowing every exit, every hiding spot, Every tactical advantage could mean the difference between coming home and coming home in a flag-draped box. Tommy Rodriguez, a football player who thought he was tough until this moment, let out a shaky breath. "Miss Martinez, I'm scared." Sarah knelt beside the group of students, her voice softer now, but no less authoritative. "Fear is normal. It means you're alive and thinking clearly. But we're going to be okay. I need you to trust me." Trust. It was something she had learned to earn in the mountains of Afghanistan, where her squad had initially doubted their female sergeant until she proved herself in firefight after firefight. Now, looking at these kids the same age as some of the Afghan children she had tried to protect during her deployment, she felt that familiar protective instinct surge through her veins. Jenny Kowalski, the same girl who had noticed Sarah's initial reaction, whispered, "You're different now. How did you know what to do so fast?" Sarah's eyes met Jenny's in the dim light. For a moment, she considered deflecting, maintaining the careful facade she had built over the past 2 years of civilian life. But these kids deserved honesty, especially now. "I used to be in the Army. I've been in situations like this before." "Like this?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Different uniform, same fear, same need to stay calm and think clearly." Sarah moved to the window, carefully lifting the edge of the blind to peer out at the parking lot. Police cars were already arriving, their red and blue lights painting the afternoon in urgent colors. "The police are here. They're trained for this, but until they can reach us, we protect each other." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone freeze. They were heavy, deliberate, getting closer. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her hip where her sidearm would have been, finding only empty air. She had to improvise. Moving silently to the supply closet, she retrieved the baseball bat kept there for emergency situations, though she doubted anyone had ever imagined this particular emergency. The aluminum felt familiar in her hands, like the rifle she had carried through countless patrol missions. Different tool, same purpose, protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. The footsteps stopped outside their door. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock. Sarah positioned herself at an angle where she could strike if the door opened while remaining out of the line of sight from the small window. She held up her free hand to the students, fingers spread, a silent command to stay absolutely still that she had learned from night raids in enemy territory. The person outside tried the handle again, more forcefully this time. Then came a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold, the distinctive click of a magazine being loaded into a weapon. She had heard that sound thousands of times, but never in a place filled with children who should have been learning about right triangles and quadratic equations. In the corner, Alyssa was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her phone. Several other students had their phones out too, texting frantic messages to parents who were probably just now hearing about the situation on the news. Sarah made a mental note to herself. In a few minutes, she would need to collect those phones. The glow from the screens could give away their position. The person in the hallway moved on, their footsteps fading toward the main office. Sarah exhaled slowly, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But she didn't relax. This was just the beginning. "Who has a phone with them?" she whispered. Multiple hands went up. "I need you to text your parents that you're safe and with me. Tell them we're following lockdown procedures. Then turn them off completely, not on silent, completely off." The light from the screens can be seen from outside. As the students complied, Sarah's mind raced through tactical assessments. The classroom was relatively secure, but not impregnable. The windows faced the parking lot, which was good for visibility, but bad for escape routes. The drop was only 1 story, but the landscaping below was filled with thorny shrubs that would slow down any evacuation. She found herself thinking about Staff Sergeant Johnson, her old squad leader, who had always said that in crisis situations, people reveal who they really are. Looking at her students now, she saw that truth playing out. Tommy, the tough guy football player, had his arm protectively around smaller kids. Alyssa, despite her tears, was helping others write their messages to parents. Marcus, the class clown, had gone completely serious, his artist's eyes scanning the room for details that might matter. But it was Jenny who surprised her most. The quiet girl who rarely spoke in class had moved closer to Sarah, her young face set with determination that reminded Sarah of some of the bravest soldiers she had served alongside. "Miss Martinez," Jenny whispered, "what can we do to help?" The question hit Sarah harder than she expected. These weren't trained soldiers. They were 15 and 16-year-old kids who should have been worried about algebra tests and homecoming dates, not active shooters and survival tactics. But they were here, in this moment, and they deserved to be treated with the respect she would give any member of her unit. "You're already helping by staying calm and following directions," Sarah replied. "But I need eyes and ears. If you hear anything, footsteps, voices, anything that doesn't sound like police or emergency responders, you let me know immediately." She paused, looking at each of their faces in the dim light filtering through the blinds. "And I need you to know something. Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear in the next few hours, you are not alone. I will not leave you. That's a promise I made to myself the day I started working here, and it's a promise I made to my squad in Afghanistan. No one gets left behind." The words hung in the air, carrying weight that went beyond their immediate situation. These kids didn't know about the night Sarah woke up screaming, reliving the ambush that had cost her 3 friends and nearly her own life. They didn't know about the PTSD counseling sessions or the medication she took to sleep. They didn't know that she had chosen substitute teaching as a way to ease back into civilian life, to find purpose in something gentle and normal after years of violence and loss. But they were about to learn that Sarah Martinez, former Army Ranger, recipient of the Bronze Star with V device for valor, survivor of 13 combat deployments, was exactly the person they needed in their corner when the world went insane. The sound of sirens was growing louder outside, but so was something else. More footsteps in the hallway, and this time they were accompanied by voices. Angry voices, young voices. Voices that belonged to students, not police. Sarah's jaw tightened as the horrible reality became clear. This wasn't some outside threat that could be contained at the perimeter. The danger was coming from inside the school, from someone who knew the building as well as she was learning to know it. Someone who had walked these halls, eaten in the cafeteria, maybe even sat in this very classroom. She looked at her students, she realized with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her, and made a decision that would have made Staff Sergeant Johnson proud. "Change of plans," she said quietly. "We're not just going to wait this out. We're going to make sure everyone in this school goes home to their families tonight." The substitute teacher who had spent 11 days helping kids solve for X was gone. In her place stood a warrior who had spent years solving for survival in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. And these kids, these beautiful, scared, brave kids, were about to learn what it meant to have a guardian angel who wore combat boots and carried scars from foreign battlefields. The real test was just beginning. Sarah Martinez had not planned on becoming anyone's hero again. That part of her life was supposed to be over, filed away with her dress uniform and service medals in a storage unit across town. For the past 2 years, she had been deliberately ordinary shopping at Target, learning to sleep without a weapon within arm's reach, trying to convince herself that the biggest crisis she would face would be whether the coffee shop ran out of her usual oat milk latte. The substitute teaching job had been perfect in its predictability. Show up at 7:30, follow lesson plans left by the regular teacher, maintain order among teenagers who thought they knew everything about the world, go home to her quiet apartment where the biggest decision was what to stream on Netflix. It was the kind of life she had dreamed about during those endless nights on watch in Afghanistan. when the horizon could explode into violence at any moment. But as she crouched in the darkened classroom with 28 terrified students depending on her, Sarah realized she had been kidding herself. You don't stop being a soldier just because you change your uniform. Her morning had started like any other since she'd begun covering for Mrs. Henderson. The alarm went off at 5:45. Old habits die hard, and she had never managed to sleep past dawn anyway. Coffee first, black and strong enough to wake the dead. A practice that dated back to FOB, forward operating base, mornings when the mess tent coffee could strip paint. Then her careful ritual of transformation, concealer to hide the bags under her eyes from another night of fragmented sleep, mascara to make her look more approachable, the cardigan that made her look like someone who had never held a rifle. Drive to Jefferson High took exactly 12 minutes, and she had used every one of them to shift her mindset. Sarah Martinez, substitute teacher, was patient and understanding. She smiled at bad jokes, explained concepts multiple times without irritation, and genuinely cared whether kids understood the difference between sine and cosine. She was not. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had once held a position for 18 hours under heavy fire to protect a convoy of medical supplies, heading to a village hospital. Her first period had been Algebra 2 Jenny Kowalski's class, actually, though the girls sat 3 rows back and rarely participated. Sarah had noticed her, though. Jenny had the kind of quiet intelligence that reminded Sarah of the Afghan interpreters she had worked with, people who saw everything and spoke only when their words would matter. There was something in Jenny's eyes that suggested she understood more about the world than most 15-year-olds should. Miss Martinez? Jenny had approached her desk after that morning's class, notebook clutched against her chest. I was wondering, do you think math actually matters? Like, in real life? It was such a normal question, the kind substitute teachers probably fielded every day. But Sarah had found herself pausing, remembering how calculating trajectories and ranges had literally saved her life and the lives of her squad members. How understanding angles and distances meant the difference between effective cover and walking into a kill zone. Math is everywhere, she had said finally. Even when you don't realize you're using it, you're using it. The trick is recognizing when it matters most. Jenny had nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer, but Sarah caught something else in the girl's expression. A recognition, maybe, that her substitute teacher understood more about when things mattered most than she let on. The lunch period had been Sarah's favorite part of the day. Not because she particularly enjoyed the cafeteria food, which bore an unfortunate resemblance to MRE's, meals ready to eat, in both taste and texture, but because it gave her a chance to observe the social dynamics of the school. In Afghanistan, understanding the human terrain was often more important than understanding the physical landscape. Who had influence? Who were the natural leaders? Who might be planning something destructive? She had positioned herself at a table with a clear view of the entire cafeteria, a habit that drew some amused looks from other teachers, but felt necessary nonetheless. From there, she could see Tommy Rodriguez holding court with the football team, his natural charisma making him a leader even among older players. Alyssa Chang sat with the academic achievers, but Sarah noticed how her eyes tracked social interactions across the room with the same analytical intensity she brought to calculus problems. Marcus Thompson sat alone, as he often did, but not because he was unpopular. Sarah had observed that he chose solitude, using lunch period to work on his art. Today he was sketching something in a notebook, his fingers moving with the kind of precision that suggested real talent. When their eyes met across the room, he offered a small wave, the same greeting he gave her every day, along with a smile that seemed genuine rather than the polite facade most students wore around substitute teachers. Interesting artwork? Sarah had asked when she walked by his table on her way to throw away her trash. Marcus looked up, surprised that she had noticed. Just ... stuff. People, mostly. I like drawing what I see. That's a valuable skill, she had said, meaning it in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Artists see things others miss. Now crouched in the darkness with those same students, Sarah realized that her careful observation hadn't been paranoia. It had been preparation. She knew these kids not just as names on a roster, but as individuals with specific strengths and weaknesses. Tommy's natural leadership ability was already emerging as he helped calm the more frightened students. Alyssa's analytical mind was working overtime, probably calculating odds and outcomes with the same precision she used for standardized tests. Marcus kept glancing toward the door, not with fear, but with the intense focus of someone recording details for later recall. And Jenny was watching Sarah herself, those intelligent eyes taking in every tactical movement, every professional assessment. The girl was too smart not to notice that her substitute math teacher moved like someone with military training. The afternoon classes had proceeded normally until fourth period, when Sarah noticed something that should have been a warning sign. During her planning period, she had walked the halls out of restlessness, another old habit from times when staying stationary too long could be deadly. Near the main office, she had overheard Principal Watson on the phone with someone, his voice tight with stress. "No, I understand the concerns about the suspension," he had been saying. "But the threats were specific, and we have to take them. Seriously, yes, I know his family's upset. No, the decision stands." Sarah had continued walking, but the conversation stuck with her. Threats, suspension, a family upset enough to call the principal and argue about consequences. In Afghanistan, she had learned that domestic disputes and personal grievances could escalate to violence just as quickly as political or religious conflicts. Sometimes faster, because they felt more personal. She should have asked more questions. Should have found a way to get more information without seeming like an overstepping substitute teacher. But she had been trying so hard to be normal, to not let her military training turn every potential problem into a tactical assessment. Now, as footsteps echoed again in the hallway outside their locked classroom door, Sarah mentally kicked herself for not trusting her instincts. Her squad leader had drummed one lesson into all of them. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Don't ignore that feeling. Don't rationalize it away. Act on it. "Miss Martinez," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Those footsteps. They're not moving like police officers, are they?" Sarah felt a surge of pride despite the circumstances. Tommy was thinking tactically, using his own experience from police visits to school events to recognize that something was off about the movement patterns in the hallway. "No," she whispered back, "they're not." The honesty felt liberating after months of carefully maintained normalcy. These kids deserved to know what they were dealing with, deserved to have a leader who would tell them the truth instead of comfortable lies. She moved closer to the group, her voice barely a breath of sound. "I need to tell you something about myself, and then I need to ask something of all of you." They leaned in, a circle of young faces illuminated by the dim light filtering through the window blinds. 2 years ago, I came back from my 4th deployment to Afghanistan. I was in Army Ranger Special Operations. I spent 13 total deployments overseas, most of them in combat zones. I've been in situations like this before, but never. She paused, looking at each of their faces. Never with people I cared about as much as I care about all of you. The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise them. When had these kids stopped being just temporary students in a temporary job and become something more? When had Jenny's quiet intelligence started reminding her of the young translator who had saved her squad's life by noticing an IED? When had Tommy's leadership potential made her think of the lieutenant she had served under during her 2nd deployment? When had Marcus's artistic observation started seeming like the kind of environmental awareness that kept people alive in hostile territory? "What I'm asking," she continued, "is for you to trust me. Not because I'm your teacher, but because keeping you safe is now my mission. In the Army, we have a saying, no one gets left behind. That applies here. Tonight, you all go home to your families. That's a promise. Alyssa raised her hand slightly. Even in crisis, some habits persisted. What do you need us to do? First, I need you to understand that this person, whoever it is, they know this school as well as we do. Maybe better. They know which doors lock, which rooms are empty, which places people might hide. So we're not going to just hide and hope they don't find us. We're going to be smart about this. Sarah moved to the window again, carefully lifting the blind to assess the situation outside. More police cars had arrived, along with what looked like a SWAT vehicle. She could see officers establishing a perimeter, but they would need time to clear the building methodically. Time she and her students might not have. Second, I need you to know that if something happens to me, if I have to leave this room, to draw attention away from you, you follow Tommy's lead. He's your squad leader until help arrives. Tommy's eyes widened. Miss Martinez, I can't. You can. You're already doing it. Look around you. Half these kids are staying calm because you're staying calm. That's leadership. She turned back to the group. Marcus, you're our intelligence officer. You notice things, details that others miss. If you see anything at all that seems important, you tell Tommy immediately. Marcus nodded, his artist's eyes already scanning the room with new purpose. Alyssa, you're our strategist. You think 3 moves ahead naturally. Jenny, you're our communication specialist. You ask the right questions, and you see through people's facades. As she assigned roles, Sarah realized she was doing more than just organizing teenagers. She was building a team. Something her military training had taught her was essential for survival in hostile environments. Every person needed a purpose, a specific way to contribute. It gave them focus, reduced panic, and created the kind of unit cohesion that could make the difference between life and death. What about everyone else? Asked David Kim, a quiet kid who usually sat in the back row working on homework for other classes. Everyone else is our early warning system. You watch, you listen, you report anything unusual to your team leaders. And you remember, we're not victims hiding in the dark. We're a unit preparing to protect ourselves and each other. The footsteps in the hallway had moved away, but Sarah knew they would return. Predators often circled back to places they had already checked, especially if they suspected their prey was hiding rather than fleeing. She needed to use this quiet time to prepare her improvised squad for what might come next. Now, she said, settling onto the floor with them, I'm going to teach you some things they don't cover in algebra class. The silence in classroom 204B was broken by Sarah's quiet but authoritative voice as she began what she privately thought of as the most important lesson she had ever taught. These weren't battle-hardened soldiers. They were teenagers whose biggest concerns that morning had been upcoming tests and weekend plans. But circumstances had thrust them into a situation where the right knowledge could mean the difference between survival and tragedy. First rule, Sarah whispered, arranging them in a closer circle where she could see every face. Sound discipline. Every sound we make is information we're giving away. Footsteps tell people where we are and how many of us there are. Whispers can carry further than you think. Even breathing can be heard if someone is listening carefully. She demonstrated, showing them how to breathe slowly and quietly, how to shift position without making noise, how to communicate with subtle hand signals. These were skills she had learned in urban combat environments, where a single misplaced footstep could alert insurgents to a patrol's presence. Tommy absorbed everything like a sponge, his athlete's discipline making him naturally good at controlling his body and movements. Like this? He whispered, practicing the breathing technique. Exactly. Now, second rule, environmental awareness. We need to know everything about our space and what's happening around it. Sarah pointed to different Areas of the classroom. Marcus, you can see the parking lot from that window angle without exposing yourself. What do you observe? Marcus moved carefully to the position Sarah indicated, staying low and to the side of the window. His artist's eye for detail served him well as he studied the scene outside. More police cars arriving. I see. Looks like SWAT setting up some kind of command post. Parents starting to show up at the barriers they've established. Good. What else? The officers are moving carefully, but they're not rushing the building. They're taking time to plan. Sarah nodded approvingly, which means they know this is a tactical situation, not a random act of violence. They're being professional, which is good for us. Jenny, what do you hear from the hallway? Jenny moved to a position near the door, her ear cocked toward the sounds beyond their locked barrier. Footsteps still moving around the building, but they sound different now, more organized. I think some of them might be police clearing rooms. Excellent observation. How can you tell the difference? Jenny considered this, her analytical mind working. The footsteps earlier were more erratic. These are more systematic, like they're following a pattern. Right. Police and military personnel move systematically when clearing a building. Random threats move more erratically, based on emotion rather than training. Sarah felt a surge of pride at how quickly these kids were adapting. Alyssa, I need you to think about timing. How long since we first heard the shots? Alyssa checked her phone before remembering she was supposed to have turned it off. About 27 minutes. In a tactical situation like this, the first 30 minutes are usually the most dangerous. After that, law enforcement has had time to establish perimeters, gather intelligence, and begin systematic responses. We're almost through the highest risk period. But even as she said it, Sarah's instincts were telling her that something was still wrong. The footsteps Jenny had identified as systematic were moving in a pattern, yes, but not the pattern she would expect from professional law enforcement. They were too fast, too focused on specific areas. Police clearing a building would methodically check every room, every closet, every potential hiding place. These movements seemed more targeted. A new sound echoed through the building. The sharp crack of splintering wood, followed by what sounded like furniture being overturned. Then voices, young voices, shouting something she couldn't quite make out. Sarah's blood ran cold as the pieces clicked together. This wasn't a single shooter situation. This was multiple perpetrators, and they were systematically searching the building for specific targets. Change of assessment, she whispered urgently. Tommy, move everyone to the far corner, away from both the door and windows. Alyssa, I need you to think about every student who's been in trouble recently. Anyone who might have grievances against the school or specific people. Miss Martinez, Marcus said from his position by the window, there's movement in the building across the courtyard. I can see into some of the classroom windows from here. What kind of movement? Looks like, oh God, there are people in those rooms, but they're not sitting at desks. They're on the floor, and someone's standing over them. Sarah's training kicked into overdrive. Multiple locations, coordinated timing, systematic searches. This was bigger and more organized than a typical school shooting. This was planned, coordinated, and the perpetrators were using knowledge of the school's layout and population to maximum effect. She moved to Marcus's position, carefully peering out at the building across the courtyard. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Through the windows of what looked like a social studies classroom, she could see students huddled on the floor while at least two figures in dark clothing stood guard over them. The body language was all wrong. These weren't random victims caught in violence. They were hostages. We need to revise our strategy, Sarah said, returning to the group. This isn't what we thought it was. Before she could explain further, the sound of splintering wood erupted much closer to their location. Someone was breaking down doors, working their way systematically through the classrooms on their hallway. Sarah's mind raced through calculations. Their door was solid wood with a good lock, but it wouldn't withstand a determined assault with the right tools. The textbook cart would slow down entry, but not prevent it. She needed options, and she needed them fast. "David, Claire, Emma," she whispered, pointing to 3 students near the back wall. "That supply closet, can you fit inside if you squeeze together?" They nodded, understanding immediately what she was asking. "If someone breaks down our door, you 3 hide in there and don't come out until police identify themselves properly. Not until you see badges and hear radio chatter. Promise me." "What about the rest of us?" Jenny asked. Sarah looked at the remaining 25 students, her heart breaking at the fear in their young faces. These weren't soldiers who had volunteered for dangerous duty. They were kids who should have been learning about polynomials and preparing for homecoming. "The rest of us are going to show them that room 204B is more trouble than it's worth." She began moving around the classroom, gathering items that could serve as weapons or deterrents. The fire extinguisher by the door would create a blinding cloud and could serve as a blunt weapon. Scissors from the supply drawer could be distributed to the older, stronger students. The industrial stapler could do serious damage at close range, but more importantly, she was repositioning furniture to create tactical advantages. The heavy oak desk went sideways across the front of the room, creating a barrier that would force anyone entering to expose themselves. Student desks were arranged to create a kind of maze that would slow down intruders and funnel them into positions where they could be ambushed. "This is insane," whispered Katie Morrison, a girl who had been quietly crying since the lockdown began. "We're just kids. We shouldn't have to." "You're right," Sarah interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "You shouldn't have to. None of you should ever have to face something like this. But you are facing it, and the choice now is whether you face it as victims or as survivors." The sound of another door being smashed open came from somewhere very close, maybe 3 or 4 classrooms away. Sarah could hear voices now, young male voices, discussing their search in the casual tones of people going through a routine checklist. "Room 198, just storage. 199 is locked, but it's Mrs. Patterson's room. She's not here on Thursdays. 200 is the computer lab. Checked it already. What about 201? Sarah realized they were moving methodically through the hallway, checking every room. Her classroom, 204B, was maybe 6 doors away from where they currently were. She had perhaps 5 minutes to finish preparing her improvised fortress. "Tommy, Marcus, David, Kim, Alex," she whispered, pointing to the strongest boys in the class. "You 4 are with me up front. Everyone else stays in the back corner unless I give a specific instruction." "Miss Martinez," Tommy said quietly, "I have to ask. Have you ever, in Afghanistan, did you ever have to?" The question hung in the air, unfinished but understood. Had she ever killed anyone? Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I did what I had to. Do to protect my squad and complete my missions. Today my mission is all of you. That's all you need to know." The honesty was stark and sobering. These kids deserved to know that their protector was someone who understood violence at the deepest level, someone who had crossed lines they couldn't even imagine. But they also deserved to know that she had never crossed those lines lightly or without cause. "Room 202 is empty." The voices were getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of doors being tested and, when locked, broken down. Sarah could hear the methodical destruction of property, the casual violation of what should have been safe spaces. 203 locked. "Stand back." The sound of wood splintering was much louder now, just across the hall. Sarah could hear them entering the room, searching through it, discussing what they found. "Nothing here but old textbooks. Check the supply closet. Empty. 204 and next." Sarah's heart rate spiked. 204A was the classroom directly across the hall from theirs. She could hear their footsteps clearly now, could make out individual voices. 3 distinct speakers, all young, all male, all talking about their search with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they had planned this carefully. 204A's locked too. Break it down. The sound of their door being smashed open was so close that several of her students jumped involuntarily. Sarah held up her hand for silence, listening intently to what was happening just yards away from their own precarious hiding place. Empty classroom, but the desks are arranged like someone was teaching. Substitute teacher schedule. Check the board. Sarah's blood turned to ice. If they were checking for substitute teachers, they were looking for specific people. This wasn't random violence. This was targeted, says Martinez. That the one? Could be. Description matches. 204B is next. That's probably where she is. The conversation was casual, matter of fact, as if they were discussing homework assignments rather than hunting human beings. Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that she was their primary target. These students, her students, were in danger because of her. The footsteps moved toward their door, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of someone testing the handle. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they began trying to break down the door, maybe another minute or two after that, before they succeeded. She looked at the faces of her students, at Jenny's quiet courage, at Tommy's natural leadership, at Marcus's artistic soul, now forced to witness something no one should have to see, at Alyssa's brilliant mind trying to calculate odds that should never have to be calculated. At all of them, 28 young lives that had been placed in her care by nothing more than the random assignment of a substitute teacher to a math class. "They're coming for me specifically," she whispered. "That means I need to draw them away from you." "No," Tommy said immediately. "No way." "It's not up for debate," Sarah said firmly. But then she saw the determination in Tommy's eyes, the way Jenny had moved closer to the improvised barricade, how Marcus was gripping one of the scissors she had distributed. These kids weren't going to let her sacrifice herself for them. "Actually," she said, a new plan forming in her mind, "you're right. We don't run from this, we end it." The handle of their door rattled as someone tested it from the outside. "Ms. Martinez?" A young male voice called through the door, artificially friendly. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Sarah recognized something in the voice, the forced casualness of someone trying to sound reasonable while planning violence. She had heard it before, in the voices of insurgents who would call out offers of negotiation while positioning snipers. "We know about your military background," the voice continued. "We know you think you're some kind of hero. But you're not in Afghanistan anymore. You're in Ohio with a bunch of kids who don't know what you really are." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The psychological warfare was crude but effective. Sarah could see doubt creeping into some of her students' faces. Who was their substitute teacher, really? What had she done overseas that made her a target? "Everything you need to know about me," Sarah called back, loud enough for her students to hear clearly, "is that I will never let anyone hurt the people under my protection." That was true in Afghanistan, and it's true here. "Noble words," the voice replied. "But you're outnumbered and outgunned. Send out Jenny Kowalski and Tommy Rodriguez, and we'll let the rest go." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. They weren't just looking for her, they had a list. Specific. Students were targets. This was personal, planned, and much worse than she had initially assessed. Jenny's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "Why would they want me?" "Because you're smart," Sarah realized. "You ask questions, you notice things. Tommy, you're a natural leader. Someone sees both of you as threats to something." The pieces were clicking together now. The overheard phone conversation about threats and suspension. Students who had been identified as problems, and now someone was systematically eliminating those problems, along with anyone who might protect them. "You have 30 seconds to open this door," the voice outside called. "After that, we come in the hard way." Sarah looked at her students, her squad. She corrected herself and made a decision that would have horrified her commanding officers, but felt absolutely right in this moment. "We don't give them anything they want," she said quietly. "But we don't wait for them to come to us either. We take the initiative." She moved to the fire extinguisher mounted by the door, hefting its substantial weight. "Marcus, I need you at the window. The moment I give the signal, you break that glass and start shouting for help. Make noise, draw attention from outside." "What are you going to do?" Tommy asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "I'm going to introduce them to the difference between hunting civilians and engaging military personnel." Sarah positioned herself beside the door, fire extinguisher raised. She had played this scenario out in urban combat situations, enemy forces breaching a defended position. The key was to disrupt their entry, create chaos, and prevent them from establishing control of the space. "Jenny, Alyssa, the moment the door opens, you lead everyone else to the window. Marcus breaks the glass, you get people out. It's a one-story drop," Alyssa calculated quickly. "Bushes below, survivable. Tommy, your rear guard. Make sure everyone gets out before you do. What about you?" Jenny asked. Sarah met her eyes, seeing in them the same intelligence that had caught her attention weeks ago. "I'm going to hold the door long enough for all of you to get clear." The sound of metal on wood announced that their attackers were using some kind of tool to attack the door lock. Sarah could see the wood beginning to splinter around the deadbolt. "Time to go," she said. Marcus moved to the window, using the chair to break the glass cleanly. The sound was loud, sharp, designed to attract attention from outside. Almost immediately, Sarah could hear shouts from the parking lot as police and emergency responders noticed the disturbance. The door lock gave way with a sharp crack, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of the door hitting her barricade of textbook carts. Someone cursed on the other side, and she heard them beginning to push against the obstacle. "Now!" Sarah shouted. Marcus dove through the window first, landing hard in the landscaping below, but immediately rolling to his feet and waving toward the police perimeter. Jenny was next, then Alyssa, then a stream of students following them out into the afternoon sunlight and safety. The textbook cart was sliding away from the door under the pressure from outside. Sarah could see fingers gripping the edge of the door, trying to widen the opening. Tommy was helping the last few students through the window when the barricade finally gave way entirely. The door swung open, revealing 3 young men in dark clothing, 2 of them carrying firearms that looked like modified hunting rifles. Sarah didn't hesitate. She triggered the fire extinguisher directly into their faces, filling the doorway with a dense cloud of chemical powder that left them blind and choking. While they stumbled backward, she charged forward with the metal canister, using it as a battering ram against the lead attacker. The impact sent him sprawling backward into his companions, all 3 of them going down in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Sarah dropped the empty extinguisher and grabbed one of the rifles, her military training taking over completely. "Tommy, go!" she shouted over her shoulder, but Tommy was already gone, the last student disappearing through the window. Just as Sarah heard sirens screaming much closer than before. Help was coming, but she needed to keep these 3 from regrouping and pursuing her students. The lead attacker, barely 18, with the kind of rage-filled eyes she had seen in young insurgents overseas, was trying to get back to his feet while reaching for a sidearm. Sarah recognized him now, Derek Hoffman, a student who had been suspended 2 weeks ago for making threats against specific classmates and teachers. The pieces of the overheard phone conversation fell into place. "Derek," she said, keeping the rifle trained on him while his 2 accomplices remained dazed from the chemical cloud. "It's over. Police are already in the building." "It's not over," he snarled, still reaching for his weapon. Not until people understand what you did to us, what this school did to us. Sarah could hear tactical teams moving through the building. Now, their coordinated movements and radio chatter distinctly different from the earlier sounds of Derek's group searching for victims. Professional help was perhaps 2 minutes away. "What I did to you?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. "Derek, I've been here 11 days. I don't even know you. You don't know me?" His voice cracked with adolescent rage mixed with something deeper and more dangerous. "You gave me a D on that algebra test. Said I wasn't trying hard enough. Sighed I needed to apply myself." The accusation was so unexpected, so disproportionate to the violence he had planned, that Sarah almost couldn't process it. "You're doing this because of a grade? Not just the grade." Derek screamed, finally getting his hand on his sidearm. "Everything. The suspension, the cops talking to my parents, everyone treating me like I'm some kind of criminal, because I told the truth about how this place works." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger as Derek raised his weapon. In Afghanistan, the decision would have been automatic: threat identified, threat eliminated. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and Derek wasn't an enemy combatant. He was a kid, barely older than her students, whose anger and poor choices had led him to this moment. "Derek," she said quietly, "you can stop this right now. Put the gun down. And we can talk about what's really bothering you." Talk? One of his companions, a thin boy with nervous eyes, had recovered enough to rejoin the conversation. "She's just trying to stall until the cops get here, Derek. Do what we came to do." Sarah recognized him too. Michael Chun, another student who had been disciplinary problems recently. The third boy was still dazed from the chemical exposure, but she could see him starting to reach for something in his jacket. The sound of tactical boots in the hallway was getting closer. Sarah estimated maybe 60 seconds before law enforcement reached their position. She needed to keep Derek talking, keep him from making a decision that would destroy whatever future he might still have. "What you came to do," Sarah repeated. "Derek, help me understand. What did you really come here to accomplish?" "Justice," Derek said, but his voice wavered slightly. "Make them pay for what they did to us." "Who is them? The students? The teachers? Me?" "All of you," Michael interjected. "Acting like you're better than us, like we don't matter, like our problems aren't real." Sarah could see the psychology of the situation now. These weren't hardened terrorists or experienced criminals. They were angry, marginalized kids who had convinced themselves that violence was the only way to make their voices heard. It was a tragedy wrapped in another tragedy. "Your problems are real," Sarah said, meaning it. "I can see you're hurting, all of you. But this isn't the way to fix it. What do you know about our problems?" Derek demanded. "You're just some substitute teacher who shows up for a few weeks and thinks she knows everything about our lives." "You're right," Sarah admitted. "I don't know everything about your lives. But I know about anger, and I know about feeling like the world doesn't care about your pain." The tactical team was close enough now that she could hear their radio communications. Professional voices coordinating a response, calling out room numbers as they cleared the building. "Derek," she said urgently, "in about 30 seconds, there are going to be a lot of police officers coming through that door. They're going to see 3 young men with weapons threatening a teacher. They're not going to stop to ask about grades or suspension or whether you feel heard. They're going to see a threat, and they're going to respond to that threat." Derek's hand was shaking now, the weight of the sidearm seeming to grow heavier as reality began to penetrate his rage. "But if you put the weapons down now," Sarah continued, "if you surrender to me before they get here, then this becomes a story about kids who made a mistake rather than a story about criminals who had to be stopped." "Team Alpha, approaching room 204B, a voice in the hallway announced, close enough that Sarah could make out individual words. "Derek," she said one last time, "choose your ending." The moment stretched like a taut wire between past and future. Between the boy Derek had been that morning and whatever he would become in the next 30 seconds, Sarah could see the war playing out in his young face, rage, battling against fear, desperation fighting with the dawning realization of consequences he hadn't fully considered. "I can't," Derek whispered, but his gun hand was lowering. "They're going to arrest us anyway. My dad's going to kill me." "Your dad's going to be grateful you're alive," Sarah said softly. "And so are the parents of every student who went home safely today because you made the right choice." Michael Chun was looking between Derek and the approaching sounds of law enforcement, his nervous energy ratcheting higher with each passing second. "Derek, man, we can't go back now." We already what?" Sarah interrupted, realizing there was more to the situation than the immediate confrontation. "Michael, what else happened today?" The question seemed to break something in Michael's composure. "The other building," he said, his voice cracking. "We were supposed to." Derek's brother was supposed to ... Sarah's blood turned cold. "What? Other building? Michael, what other building?" "The middle school," Derek said, his weapon now hanging at his side. "My brother Tyler, he was supposed to, but he chickened out. Called us 20 minutes ago, said he couldn't do it. That's why we had to come here instead." Relief and horror warred in Sarah's chest. Relief that whatever had been planned for the middle school hadn't happened. Horror at the scope of what these boys had been contemplating. This wasn't just about one high school, one math grade, one suspension. This was about a network of angry young people who had convinced themselves that mass violence was an appropriate response to their pain. "Team Alpha, breach in 30 seconds, the voice in the hallway announced. "Derek, Michael," Sarah said urgently, weapons on the ground, hands visible. "Do it now, and this ends without anyone else getting hurt." Derek looked at the rifle Sarah was holding trained on him, then at his own sidearm, then at the door where tactical officers would appear at any moment. Sarah could see the exact moment when the reality of his situation fully hit him. The moment when he stopped being an angry kid, playing out a revenge fantasy, and became a young man facing the destruction of his entire future. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, setting his gun on the floor and raising his hands. "God, I'm so sorry." Michael followed suit, his hands shaking as he raised them. The third boy, still dazed from the chemical exposure, was helped to his feet by his companions. All three of them now standing with hands raised as the sound of tactical boots reached their door. "Sarah Martinez, substitute teacher," Sarah called out loudly. "I have 3 suspects in custody, weapons secured. I am armed but friendly." The response was immediate and professional. "Ms. Martinez, this is Sergeant Rodriguez, SWAT Team Alpha. We need you to place your weapon on the ground and step away from it." Sarah complied immediately, setting the rifle down and stepping back with her hands clearly visible. She had worked with enough tactical teams to know that the next few minutes would be crucial. They needed to sort out who was threat and who was victim before anyone made a mistake in the adrenaline-fueled confusion. 3 suspects, ages approximately 16 to 18, weapons on the ground behind me. They have surrendered voluntarily. No injuries on my side. The door filled with tactical officers, their movements precise and coordinated. Within seconds, Derek, Michael, and their companion were secured with zip tie restraints, while other officers swept the room to ensure no additional threats remained. Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact man with graying temples and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen too much, approached Sarah with cautious respect. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us for debriefing. But first, are you injured?" "No injuries. My students evacuated through the classroom window approximately 4 minutes ago. They should be at the police perimeter by now. We've accounted for 28 students from this classroom, all safe," Rodriguez confirmed. "You did good work here, ma'am." As the SWAT officers led Derek and his companions away, Derek turned back to look at Sarah one more time. "Ms. Martinez," he called out, his voice breaking, "I really am sorry. We didn't want to hurt kids. We just wanted them to listen." Sarah met his eyes, seeing in them the same lost expression she had seen in young Afghan fighters who had been recruited by extremists with promises that violence would solve their problems. "I know," she said. "Now they'll listen. The question is whether you'll use that chance to say something worth hearing." The building was declared secure 23 minutes after the initial lockdown had begun. Sarah found herself in the school's conference room, surrounded by law enforcement officers, school administrators, and crisis counselors, all trying to piece together what had happened and why. Principal Watson, his face pale and drawn, was the first to speak. "Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology. Derek Hoffman was suspended 2 weeks ago for making threats against specific students and staff members. I should have shared that information with all substitute teachers." "What kind of threats?" Sarah asked. "He claimed that certain students and teachers were conspiring to keep him from graduating, to ruin his life. He specifically mentioned Jenny Kowalski and Tommy Rodriguez as students who got special treatment while he was ignored. And he mentioned you by name after you gave him a failing grade on a test." Sarah remembered the test, a basic algebra assessment that Derek had barely attempted. She had followed standard grading protocols, nothing personal or vindictive. But for a young man already feeling marginalized and angry, it had apparently become a symbol of everything wrong with his life. The threatening language escalated over several days, Principal Watson continued. His parents were called in, but they insisted Derek was just venting and didn't mean anything by it. When we suspended him, they threatened to sue the school for discrimination. Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator on the case, leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, we need to understand how you knew to prepare your students the way you did. Your military background explains some of it, but you seem to anticipate tactics that most civilian teachers wouldn't recognize." Sarah considered how much to reveal about her own instincts and training. "In Afghanistan, I learned that domestic threats often follow patterns similar to insurgent tactics. When I heard the systematic searching of classrooms, when I realized they were looking for specific people rather than just causing random violence, it reminded me of targeted elimination operations I had seen overseas." "Targeted elimination," Detective Santos repeated, making notes. "So you recognize this as an assassination attempt rather than a mass shooting?" "Derek and his friends weren't trying to kill as many people as possible," Sarah confirmed. "They had a list. Specific students they saw as enemies, specific staff members they blamed for their problems. If they had succeeded in eliminating those targets, they probably would have tried to escape rather than continuing to attack random victims." The revelation sent a chill through the room. Principal Watson's face had gone even paler. Jenny Kowalski, Tommy Rodriguez, they're honor students, natural leaders. Derek saw them as representatives of everything he couldn't achieve. And Ms. Martinez, Detective Santos added, represented authority that had judged him and found him wanting. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the district's crisis counselor, had been quiet throughout most of the briefing, but now she spoke up. "This fits a pattern we're seeing more frequently. Young people who feel marginalized don't just lash out randomly anymore. They identify specific people they blame for their situation and plan targeted attacks. It's more personal, more focused, and in some ways more dangerous than traditional mass shootings." "What about the middle school connection?" Sarah asked. "Derek mentioned his brother Tyler was supposed to do something there." Detective Santos consulted her notes. "Tyler Hoffman, 15, was found at home by officers approximately an hour ago. He had weapons and what appears to be a detailed plan to attack Jefferson Middle School during their after-school program. When we arrested him, he broke down completely. Said he couldn't go through with it, called his brother to tell him the plan was off. So Derek and his friends came to the high school instead. As a backup target, yes. They had plans for both locations, contingent on various factors. This was much more sophisticated than we initially realized. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How many other locations? How many other people were involved in planning this? We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 6 students across both schools were involved in the planning stages. Chat logs, social media posts, weapons procurement. This wasn't something that developed overnight. The scope of what had almost happened was staggering. 2 schools, multiple attackers, coordinated. Timing. If Tyler Hoffman hadn't lost his nerve, if Derek's group had been more competent, if Sarah hadn't been in that classroom with military training and combat experience. The students I protected, Sarah said suddenly. Jenny taught me all of them. Are they getting counseling? Support? Dr. Hayes nodded. We have crisis counselors meeting with every student who was in your classroom. But Ms. Martinez, many of them are asking specifically about you. They want to know if you're okay when they'll see you again. They formed an attachment, Principal Watson observed. From what they're telling us, you didn't just protect them physically. You gave them roles, responsibilities, made them feel like they were part of the solution rather than just victims. Sarah thought about Tommy's natural leadership, Jenny's analytical intelligence, Marcus's artistic attention to detail. They are part of the solution. Those kids showed courage and teamwork under impossible circumstances. They saved themselves as much as I saved them. Detective Santos was reviewing her timeline notes. Ms. Martinez, we need to talk about your actions during the confrontation itself. By law, you were within your rights to use deadly force to protect yourself and others. But you chose not to. Can you walk us through that decision-making process? The question hit Sarah harder than she had expected. In Afghanistan, the rules of engagement had been clear: hostile intent plus hostile capability equals justified. Use of force. Derek and his friends had demonstrated both. She could have shot Derek when he raised his weapon, and no one would have questioned her decision. Derek is 18 years old, Sarah said quietly. Barely older than the students I was protecting. He was angry, he was making terrible choices, but he wasn't irredeemable. In that moment, I saw a kid who needed help more than he needed to be stopped with a bullet. That was a significant risk, Detective Santos pointed out. If you had miscalculated. If I had miscalculated, then at least I would have tried to save a life instead of taking one. I've taken lives before, Detective. Sometimes it was necessary, and I did what I had to do. But every time, it changes you a little bit. Those boys made terrible decisions today, but they don't have to die for them. Dr. Hayes was studying Sarah with professional interest. Ms. Martinez, can I ask why you chose substitute teaching after your military service? It seems like an unusual transition. Sarah had been dreading this question, but she realized now that she was ready to answer it honestly. I thought I wanted a normal life, quiet, predictable, safe. I thought I could leave the warrior part of myself behind and become someone ordinary. And now? Now I realize that being a warrior isn't something you do. It's something you are. The question is what you choose to fight for. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had devoted their careers to education, to protecting young people, to building communities. Today I fought for kids who deserve to go home safely to their families. That feels like the best possible use of everything the Army taught me. Principal Watson leaned back in his chair, a decision forming in his expression. Ms. Martinez, I have a proposition for you. Mrs. Henderson isn't coming back. She's decided to retire early after this incident. We need a permanent math teacher. But more than that, we need someone who understands that teaching is about more than just academic subjects. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to keep fighting for kids who need someone in their corner. Someone who sees them as individuals worth protecting, worth believing in, worth saving from their own worst impulses. Sarah thought about Derek Hoffman sitting in a holding cell somewhere, facing charges that would reshape his entire future. She thought about Tyler Hoffman, the younger brother who had pulled back from the brink but would need years of support and guidance to find a better path. She thought about all the angry, marginalized young people who might be planning their own acts of violence because they couldn't see any other way to make their voices heard. What about Derek and the others? What happens to them now? Detective Santos consulted her notes. Derek and Michael will likely be charged as adults conspiracy, weapons charges, attempted assault. Tyler might be tried as a juvenile, depending on the prosecutor's decision. They're looking at serious prison time. Could I visit them? Talk to them? Why would you want to do that? Sarah thought about the moment when Derek had lowered his weapon, when she had seen the frightened boy behind the angry facade. Because someone needs to show them that there are better ways to be heard, better ways to matter. Maybe I can't save them from the consequences of what they did today, but maybe I can help them make better choices going forward. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Dr. Hayes spoke. Ms. Martinez, I think you understand something that a lot of people miss about these situations. The perpetrators are victims of their own anger, their own pain, their own inability to see beyond violence as a solution. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it does suggest that punishment alone won't prevent the next Derek Hoffman. So what will? People like you, Principal Watson said simply. People who see the person behind the problem, who refuse to give up on kids even when they've given up on themselves. Sarah stood up, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life since she had returned from her final deployment. When do I start? 3 weeks after the incident that had transformed her from substitute teacher to local hero, Sarah Martinez stood before her first official class as a permanent member of Jefferson High School's faculty. The same classroom, 204B, looked different. Now, the window had been repaired, the damaged door replaced, the furniture arranged back in traditional rows. But the space felt changed in ways that had nothing to do with physical repairs. 26 of her original 28 students had chosen to stay in her class when Mrs. Henderson officially retired. Only 2 had transferred to different sections, and Sarah understood their choice. For some people, traumatic spaces could never again feel safe, no matter who stood at the front of the room. But for the others, for Jenny Kowalski, now sitting in the front row with questions that went far beyond algebra. For Tommy Rodriguez, who had emerged as an unofficial peer counselor for other students dealing with anxiety. For Marcus Thompson, whose artwork had begun incorporating themes of heroism and protection. This classroom had become something sacred. A place where they had discovered their own courage, where they had learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. "Good morning," Sarah said, looking out at faces that were no longer just names out of roster but individuals she had fought alongside, protected, and learned to love in the way that only shared adversity could create. Before we start today's lesson on quadratic equations, I want to share some news with you. She gestured to a letter on her desk, official school district letterhead, visible even from the back row. Derek Hoffman, Michael Chun, and Jason Wu have all entered plea agreements. Derek will serve 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Michael and Jason will serve 6 months, followed by community service requirements. The class was silent, processing this information. These weren't abstract criminals anymore. They were classmates, people they had grown up with, whose anger and poor choices had almost destroyed multiple lives. But more importantly, Sarah continued, all 3 of them have agreed to participate in a new counseling program that focuses on helping young people find constructive ways to deal with anger and feelings of marginalization. Tyler Hoffman is already in the program, and by all accounts, making good progress. Jenny raised her hand, the same gesture that had become familiar over weeks of increasingly complex questions. Have you talked to them? To Derek and the others? Sarah nodded. I visit them once a week. We talk about a lot of things: anger, choices, consequences, and possibilities for the future. Derek is working on his GED while in detention. He wants to study social work when he gets out, help other kids who are struggling with the same feelings that led him to make such destructive choices. That's... Tommy searched for the right word. That's actually pretty cool. That he wants to help people instead of hurt them. People can change, Sarah said simply. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to realize you want to climb back up. Sometimes it takes someone believing in your capacity for change, even when you don't believe in it yourself. Marcus, who had been quietly sketching in his notebook, looked up. Is that why you became a teacher? To help people change? The question went to the heart of Sarah's own transformation over the past month. I became a teacher because I realized that being a warrior doesn't always mean carrying a weapon. Sometimes it means carrying hope or knowledge, or just the belief that every person has the potential to be better than their worst moment. She moved to the whiteboard where, instead of mathematical equations, she had written a single question. What does it mean to be strong? Before we start today's math lesson, I want you to think about that question. Not the physical strength to lift weights or run fast, but the inner strength that matters when life gets difficult. Alyssa Chang, whose analytical mind had been processing not just the events of 3 weeks ago, but their broader implications, spoke up. Strength is doing the right thing even when you're scared. Good, what else? Strength is protecting people who can't protect themselves, offered David Kim, who had emerged from his usual quiet demeanor to become one of the most thoughtful contributors to class discussions. Strength is admitting when you're wrong and trying to do better, added Claire Morrison, thinking perhaps of Derek's journey from attempted violence to genuine remorse. Sarah wrote each answer on the board, creating a list that would have been familiar to anyone who had served in the military, but might have been revolutionary to teenagers who had grown up thinking strength meant never showing vulnerability. All excellent answers, Sarah said. Now here's what I want you to understand about mathematics and about life. Every problem has a solution, but finding that solution requires patience, persistence, and often the willingness to try multiple approaches before you find the one that works. She turned to write an equation on the board, but this wasn't the standard quadratic formula their textbook prescribed. Instead, she wrote, anger plus time plus support equals possibility for change. Derek Hoffman spent months believing that his anger plus violence would equal some kind of justice or satisfaction. He was wrong about the equation. But now he's learning a different formula. His anger plus time plus support from counselors and teachers equals the possibility for positive change. Tommy raised his hand. Are you saying math can solve personal problems? Sarah smiled, recognizing the intelligence behind the question. I'm saying that the same logical thinking we use to solve mathematical problems can be applied to human problems. Break complex issues down into smaller parts. Test different approaches. Learn from what doesn't work. Be patient with the process. As the class settled into their actual algebra lesson, Sarah noticed something that had become routine over the past weeks. Her students were more engaged, more willing to ask questions, more supportive of each other's learning. The crisis they had shared had created bonds that extended beyond the classroom, creating a sense of community that teachers often struggled for years to develop. During lunch period, Sarah made her way to the main office for a meeting that had become part of her weekly routine. Principal Watson had instituted a new program called Early Warning, designed to identify students who might be struggling with anger, isolation, or thoughts of violence before those feelings escalated to dangerous levels. How are our at-risk students doing this week? Watson asked as Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk. Sarah consulted her notes, written observations from classes, hallway interactions, and cafeteria conversations. Marcus Thompson is thriving. His art has become a positive outlet for processing what happened, and he started a sketch club for students who want to express themselves creatively. Tommy Rodriguez has stepped into a natural mentoring role. I've seen him intervening when underclassmen are being bullied or struggling socially. What about the students we're more concerned about? Kevin Lansing is still isolating himself, refusing to engage with counseling services. His grades are dropping, and I've heard from other teachers that he's been making concerning comments about understanding why Derek did what he did. Watson's expression grew serious. Kevin was a sophomore who had been flagged by multiple teachers for angry outbursts, social isolation, and increasingly dark themes in his written assignments. I think he needs more intensive intervention, Sarah continued. But he also needs to see that there are adults who care about him as a person, not just as a potential problem to be managed. Are you volunteering? Sarah had been asking herself the same question. Kevin reminded her painfully of Derek, intelligent but angry, feeling powerless and invisible, looking for ways to make an impact on a world that seemed indifferent to his existence. I'd like to try, she said, but not as his teacher or as an authority figure. As someone who understands what it's like to feel angry at the world. This was new territory for Sarah, using her own experiences with trauma and anger as tools for connecting with troubled students. In Afghanistan, she had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to push through pain and fear in service of the mission. But here, in this different kind of battlefield, vulnerability might be more powerful than stoicism. What would you need? From the administration? Permission to meet with Kevin off the record, outside of formal counseling sessions. And backup if he does open up to me about violent thoughts or plans. I need to know there are immediate resources available. Watson nodded. Done. But Sarah, I need you to be careful. You've already been through one traumatic incident. I don't. What you carrying the weight of every troubled kid in this school? I'm not trying to save everyone, Sarah replied. But I learned something that day in my classroom. These kids don't just need protection from threats, they need to see that adults believe in their potential for good, even when they can't see it themselves. After school, Sarah found herself in an unexpected place, the Jefferson County Juvenile Detention Center, sitting across from Derek Hoffman, in a sterile conference room that smelled of disinfectant and institutional despair. Derek had changed. In the 3 weeks since his arrest, the angry defiance had been replaced by something quieter but deeper, a young man beginning to grapple with the full implications of his choices and their impact on others. Miss Martinez, he said quietly, I keep thinking about something you said that day, about choosing my ending. What about it? I chose the wrong ending, Derek said, his voice breaking slightly. Not just for me, but for Tyler, for Michael, for Jason, for all those kids who were scared because of what we planned. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus the kind of manipulative contrition that some offenders learn to perform. What she saw was a young man genuinely struggling with the weight of nearly becoming responsible for multiple deaths. The ending you chose that day was to surrender when you still had other options, Sarah pointed out. That choice probably saved lives, including your own. But the bigger choice, the months of planning, convincing my brother, getting Michael, and Jason involved, that is all wrong. So what do you do with that knowledge now? Derek looked out the small window at the parking lot beyond. I've been thinking about something my counselor said. That maybe the reason I felt so powerless was because I was focusing on what other people had that I didn't, instead of thinking about what I could contribute. Meaning? Like, I was angry that Jenny Kowalski got good grades without trying, that Tommy Rodriguez was popular, that you seemed to connect with students better in 11 days than some teachers do in years. But I never asked myself what I was bringing to the table, what I could do to make things better instead of just complaining about how unfair everything was. Sarah nodded, recognizing the psychological shift that separated genuine rehabilitation from surface-level compliance. That's a big realization, Derek. What are you planning to do with it? My counselor thinks I could be good at peer mediation when I get out. Working with other kids who are angry, helping them find better ways to deal with their problems than what I chose. Derek met her eyes directly. Would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation for me when I apply to college? I know I don't deserve it, but, Derek, Sarah interrupted gently, everyone deserves a second chance to prove they're better than their worst moment. Yes, I'll write that letter. But more than that, I want you to know that I believe in your capacity to help other people avoid the mistakes you made. The transformation in Derek's expression was remarkable, hope replacing the resigned despair that had characterized their earlier conversations. Why? He asked. Why do you believe in me when most people think I'm just a monster? Sarah thought about her own journey from warrior to teacher, about the night terrors and flashbacks that had nearly destroyed her civilian life, about the long process of learning to channel destructive experiences toward constructive purposes. Because I've seen what anger and trauma can do to good people, she said. And I've seen what good people can do when they find healthy ways to process anger and trauma. You're not a monster, Derek. You're a young man who made terrible choices. When you were in pain, there's a difference. As she drove home from the detention center, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrifying afternoon when gunshots had shattered the normal rhythm of a Tuesday math class. The quiet, anonymous existence she had sought after leaving the Army was gone, replaced by something far more complicated, but infinitely more meaningful. Her apartment, once a refuge from the complexities of human interaction, now felt too small to contain the energy and purpose that filled her days. The walls were covered with thank you cards from students, photos from classroom activities, and articles about the new violence prevention programs being implemented at schools across the district. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jenny. Kowalski, Ms. M. Finished my application essay for the academic scholarship. Used our classroom experience as an example of how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Jenny's essay was one of dozens of ripple effects Sarah had observed over the past month. Students who had been in her classroom that day were pursuing opportunities they might never have considered before. Tommy was applying for a leadership program at a local community college. Marcus had submitted his artwork to a statewide competition focused on themes of resilience and community. Alyssa was volunteering as a tutor for at-risk middle school students, but perhaps the most significant change was in how the entire school community approached the issue of student mental health and social connection. The early warning program principle Watson had initiated was identifying struggling students before they reached crisis points, connecting them with resources and support systems that addressed root causes rather than just managing symptoms. Dr. Hayes, the district crisis counselor, had become a frequent collaborator in Sarah's efforts to understand and prevent student violence. Their weekly meetings had evolved into a comprehensive approach that combined traditional counseling with peer support, academic engagement, and community connection. We're seeing a significant decrease in disciplinary incidents across all district schools, Dr. Hayes reported during their latest session. But more importantly, we're seeing increased help-seeking behavior. Students are coming forward to talk about depression, anxiety, family problems, bullying issues that used to fester in isolation until they exploded into crisis. What do you think is making the difference? Sarah asked. Honestly, I think it's the story that came out of your classroom. Students saw that adults would fight for them, would take risks to protect them, would refuse to give up on them even in the worst circumstances. That changes how they see themselves and their relationship to the adult world. Sarah understood what Dr. Hayes meant, but she also recognized that the story was bigger than just her actions that day. It was about Jenny's quiet courage, Tommy's natural leadership, Marcus's attention to detail, Alyssa's strategic thinking, all the ways that ordinary young people had risen to extraordinary circumstances. The real heroes were the students, Sarah said. I just gave them permission to be heroic. That might be the most important thing any teacher can do. 6 months after the incident, Sarah stood before the school board to present a proposal that had been months in development. The conference room was packed with parents, teachers, students, and community members who had followed the district's transformation with keen interest. The Jefferson High School Peer Guardian Program, Sarah began, is designed to formalize something that happened naturally in my classroom during the crisis. Students protecting and supporting each other, taking active roles in their own safety and the well-being of their peers. She clicked to the next slide of her presentation, showing photos of student training sessions, peer counseling workshops, and conflict resolution seminars. The program has 3 components. First, training selected students in basic crisis response, de-escalation techniques, and emergency procedures. Second, creating formal peer counseling opportunities where students can connect struggling classmates with adult resources. Third, establishing student-led initiatives that address the root causes of social isolation and anger that can lead to violence. Board member Patricia Williams raised her hand. Ms. Martinez, some parents have expressed concern about putting additional burdens on students, asking them to take responsibility for problems that adults should be handling. Sarah had anticipated this question. Mrs. Williams, we're not asking students to replace professional counselors or security personnel. We're recognizing that students often see warning signs that adults miss, and we're giving them appropriate tools to respond to those observations. She clicked to a new slide showing statistics from the past 6 months. Since implementing the pilot version of this program, we've seen a 40% increase in students self-reporting mental health concerns, a 60% decrease in physical altercations between students, and a 30% improvement in overall academic performance among participants. But more importantly, the program was changing the culture of the school in ways that couldn't be captured in statistics. Students were taking ownership of their community's well-being, creating an environment where seeking help was seen as strength rather than weakness, where differences were addressed through dialogue rather than violence. Tommy Rodriguez, now a senior and one of the program's first peer counselors, stood to address the board. Before that day, in Ms. Martinez's classroom, I thought being strong meant never showing fear, never asking for help, never admitting I didn't have all the answers. But I learned that real strength is being willing to protect people who need protection, to speak up when something's wrong, to believe that every person in our school community matters. Jenny Kowalski, now a junior with college scholarship offers, based on her essay about leadership under pressure, added her perspective. The Peer Guardian program isn't about turning students into security guards or therapists. It's about teaching us that we all have a responsibility to take care of each other, and giving us the skills to do that effectively. The board voted unanimously to approve full funding for the program's expansion to all district schools. After the meeting, as parents and community members filed out of the conference room, Sarah found herself surrounded by students from her original classroom, now scattered across different grade levels but still connected by their shared experience. Marcus, whose artwork now adorned the school's main hallway with themes of resilience and community, handed her a small sketchbook. "I've been working on something for you," he said quietly. The sketchbook contained detailed drawings of that day, not the violence or fear, but the moments of courage and connection. Jenny helping other students stay calm, Tommy organizing the evacuation, Alyssa calculating escape routes, Sarah herself, not as a military hero, but as a teacher who had refused to abandon her students. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely moved by the artistic interpretation of their shared trauma, transformed into shared strength. "They're for the book," Marcus explained. "Dr. Hayes thinks our story could help other schools, other communities." She's been talking to publishers about a book that tells what really happened that day, how it changed all of us, how it could change other places too. The idea of their experience becoming a resource for others felt both daunting and appropriate. If Derek's anger and poor choices could serve as a warning to other young people heading down similar paths, if their classroom's response could serve as a model for other communities facing similar threats, then something meaningful could emerge from even the darkest moments. What started as an ordinary October day at Jefferson High School became the catalyst for a revolutionary movement in violence prevention. When substitute math teacher Sarah Martinez, a former Army combat medic seeking refuge from her military past, found herself trapped in classroom 204B with 28 students during an armed crisis, none of them could have imagined they were about to change the future of American education. The threat came from Derek Hoffman, an 18-year-old former student consumed by anger and planning violence against those he blamed for his struggles. But instead of becoming another tragic headline, this moment became something extraordinary. Sarah's military training, combined with her students' natural leadership abilities, transformed a potential massacre into a masterclass in courage, community, and redemption. Students like Jenny Kowalski, Tommy Rodriguez, and Marcus Thompson didn't just survive that day, they discovered their own capacity for heroism. Working together, they helped Sarah de-escalate the situation while protecting their classmates and ultimately convincing Derek to surrender without harming anyone. But the real story began after the crisis ended. Rather than simply returning to normal, the Jefferson High community chose transformation. They developed what became known as the Jefferson Model, a comprehensive approach to violence prevention, centered on peer support, early intervention, and restorative justice. The program's 5 pillars revolutionized how schools address potential violence, training students to recognize warning signs in their peers, creating peer counseling networks, implementing restorative justice practices, building community partnerships, and fostering a culture where collective care replaced individual competition. The results were remarkable. Jefferson High saw an 80% reduction in disciplinary incidents and a 90% reduction in student-reported feelings of isolation. Most importantly, they prevented multiple planned attacks through early intervention and peer support. Perhaps most surprisingly, Derek Hoffman became one of the program's most powerful advocates. His journey from would-be perpetrator to violence prevention counselor proved that even the darkest moments could become foundations for redemption and positive change. Over the following decade, the Jefferson Model spread to over 400 schools across 37 states and internationally. Students who learned these principles went on to become leaders in conflict resolution, politics, social work, and community building. Sarah Martinez evolved from substitute teacher to director of the National Center for Student-Led Violence Prevention. That the true measure of their success wasn't in the dramatic moment of crisis averted, but in the thousands of daily acts of ordinary heroism that became normal at Jefferson High. Students learned that being a hero didn't require special abilities, it simply required the willingness to care for each other and refuse to give up on anyone. 10 years later, Jefferson High stands as proof that the most effective response to violence isn't more security, but stronger communities. The bronze statue in their courtyard figures with hands reaching toward each other symbolizes the lesson they learned. We protect each other not through walls and weapons, but through connection, compassion, and the revolutionary belief that everyone deserves the chance to be more than their worst moment. Ready to explore more incredible true stories of transformation and hope? Subscribe to our channel where every story matters and silence is never forgotten.